Assalamu alaikum warahmatullah. This is Mohammadpur, Assistant Professor, Department of English, Mohammadpur Kendriya College, Dhaka. Due to the spreading of COVID-19 all over the world, actual class is not possible. Therefore, our honorable principal, Professor Soyod Jafar Ali, motivates us and gives all types of logistics software to continue online class. Well, today I am going to take a class for the students of honors second year, Introduction to Drama, and my focus will be on Riders to the Sea, composed by Edmund John Millington Synge. Before going to the drama, we have to know the background of the composer or writer. Edmund John Millington Synge was an Irish playwright, poet, prose writer, travel writer, and collector of folklore. He was a key figure in the Irish literary revival and was one of the co-founders of the Abbey Theatre. He is best known for his play, The Playboy of the Western World, which caused riots in Dublin during its opening run at the Abbey Theatre. Although he came from a privileged Anglo-Irish background, Synge's writings are mainly concerned with the world of the Catholic peasants of rural Ireland and with what he saw as the essential paganism of the worldview. Since developed Hodgkin's disease, a metastatic cancer that was then untreatable, he died several weeks short of his 38th birthday. As he was trying to complete his last play, died of the sorrows. His early life. Synge was born in Newtown, Villas, Rathfarnham, County Dublin on 16 April 1871. He was the youngest son of a family of the 8 children. His parents were members of the Protestant upper middle class. His father, John Hastings, who was a barrister, came from a family of landed gentry in Glanmore Castle, County Wicklow. He was the uncle of brothers mathematician John Lytton Synge and optical microscopy pioneer Edward Hutchinson Synge. Synge's parental grandfather, also named John Synge, was an evangelical Christian involved in a movement that became the Plymouth Brethren, and his maternal grandfather, Robert Traill, had been a Church of England rector in Skull County Cork, who died in 1847 during the Great Irish Famine. His great-great-grandfather was the Archdeacon of Killala. Since his father contracted smallpox and died in 1872 at the age of 49, he was buried on his son's first birthday. Since his mother moved the family to the house next door to her mother's house in Rutger, County Dublin. Singh, although often ill, had a happy childhood there. He developed an interest in birdwatching along the banks of the River Dodder and during family holidays at the seaside resort of Greatstone, County Wicklow, and the family estate at Glanmore. Singh was educated privately at school in Dublin and Bray, and later studied piano, flute, violin, music theory and counterpoint at the Royal Irish Academy of Music. Travelled to the continent to study music, but changed his mind and decided to focus on literature. He was a talented student and won a scholarship in counterpoint in 1891. The family moved to the suburb of Kingstown, now Dunlopere, in 1888, and Singh entered Trinity College Dublin the following year. He graduated with a bachelor's degree in 1892, having studied Irish and Hebrew, as well as counting his music studies and playing with the Academy Orchestra in the ancient concert rooms. Between November 1889 and 1894, he took private music lessons with Robert Prescott Stewart. Synge joined the Dublin Nationalist Field Club and read the works of Charles Darwin. He wrote, "When I was about 14, I obtained a book of Darwin's. My studies showed me the force of what I read, and the more I put it from me, more it rushed back with new instances and power. Soon afterwards, I turned my attention to works of Christian evidence, reading them at first with pleasure, soon with doubt, and at last in some cases with derision." He then continued, "Soon after I had relinquished the kingdom of God, I began to take up a real interest in the kingdom of Ireland. My policies went round toward temperate nationalism." Since later developed an interest in Irish antiquities and the Aran Islands, and he became a member of the Irish League for a year. He left the league because, as he told Montgomery, "My theory of regeneration of Ireland differs from yours. I wish to work on my own for the cause of Ireland, and I shall never be able to do so if I get mixed up with revolutionary and semi-military movement." In 1893, he published his first known work, a poem influenced by Wordsworth, Cotabus, a college miscellany, emerging as a writer. After graduating, Singh decided that he wanted to be a professional musician and went to Germany to study music. He stayed in Koblenz during 1893 and moved to Würzburg in January 1894, partly because he was shy about performing in public and partly because of doubt about his ability. He decided to abandon music and pursue his literary interest. He returned to the Ireland in June 1894 and moved to Paris in January 1895 to study literature and language at the Sorbonne. During summer holidays with his family in Dublin, he met and fell in love with Cherry Mathewson, a friend of one of his cousins and members of the Plymouth Brethren. He proposed to her in 1895 and again the next year, but she turned him down on both occasions because of their differing, differing views on religion. This rejection affected Synge greatly and reinforced his determination to spend as much time as possible outside Ireland. In 1896, Synge visited Italy to study the language for a time before returning to Paris. Later that year, he met William Butler Yeats, who encouraged him to live for a while in the Aran Islands and then return to Dublin and devote himself to creative work. That year he joined with Yeats, Augusta, Lady Gregory, and George William Russell to form the Irish National Theatre Society, which later established the Abbey Theatre. He also wrote some pieces of literary criticism for Guns Ireland, Livre, and other journals, as well as unpublished poems and prose in a decadent fin de siecle style. He also attended lectures at the Sorbonne by the noted Celtic scholar Henry de Arbois de Jabrinville. In 1897, Synge had his first attack of Hodgkin's disease and had an enlarged gland removed from his neck. The following year, he spent the summer in the Aran Islands. He spent the next 5 summers in the Aran Islands, collecting stories and folklore and perfecting his Irish while counting to live in Paris for most of the rest of each year. He also visited Brittany regularly. During this period, he wrote his first play, When the Moon Has Set, and sent it to Lady Gregory for the Irish Literary Theatre in 19, but she rejected it. The play was not published until it appeared in the collected works. Synge's first account of life in the Aran Islands was published in the New Ireland Reviews in 1898, and his book, The Aran Islands, based largely on journals, was completed in 1901 and published in 1907 with illustrations by Jack Butler Yeats. Since considered the book my first serious piece of work, when Lady Gregory read the manuscript, she advised Synge to remove any direct naming and places, and to add more folk stories. But he refused to do either because he wanted to create something more realistic. The book expresses Synge's belief that beneath the Catholicism of the islanders, it was possible to detect a substratum of the pagan beliefs of their ancestors. His experience in the Aran Islands were to form the basis of the plays about Irish rural life that Synge went on to write. In 1903, Synge left Paris and moved to London. He had written two one-act plays, Riders to the Sea and The Shadow of the Glen. The previous year, these met with Lady Gregory's approval, and The Shadow of the Glen was performed at the Molesworth Hall in October 1903. Riders to the Sea was performed at the same venue in February the following year. The Shadow of the Glen, under the title In the Shadow of the Glen, formed part of the bill for the opening run of the Abbey Theatre from 27th December 1904 to 3rd January 1905. Both plays were based on stories that Synge had collected in the Aran Islands, and Synge relied on props from the Aran Islands to help set the stage for each of them. He also relied on Hiberno English, the English dialect of Ireland, to reinforce its usefulness as a literary language, partly because he believed that the Irish language could not survive. The Shadow of the Glen, based on a story about an unfaithful wife, was attacked in print by the Irish nationalist reader Arthur Griffith as a slur on Irish womanhood. Years later, Synge wrote, When I was writing The Shadow of the Glen, some years ago, I got more aid than any learning could have given me from a chink in the floor of the old Wicklow house where I was staying, that let me hear what was being said by the servant girls in the kitchen. This encouraged more critical attacks, alleging that Synge described Irish women in an unfair manner. Riders to the Sea was also attacked by nationalists, this time including Patrick Pearse, who decried it because of the author's attitude to God and religion. Pearse, Arthur Griffith, and other conservative-minded Catholics claimed Synge had done a disservice to Irish nationalism by not idealizing his characters. However, later critics have attacked Synge for idealizing the Irish peasantry too much. A third one-act play, The Tinker's Wedding, was drafted around this time, but Synge initially made no attempt to have it performed, largely because of a scene in which a priest is tied up in a sack, which, as he wrote to the publisher Elkin Matthews in 1905, would probably upset a good many of our Dublin friends. When the Abbey Theatre was set up, Synge was appointed literary advisor and became one of the directors along with Yeats and Lady Gregory. He differed from Yeats and Lady Gregory on what he believed the Irish theatre should be, as he wrote to Stephen McKenna. I don't believe in the possibility of a purely fantastic, unmodern, ideal, breezy, spring dayish Corsalino National Theatre. No drama can grow up anything other than the fundamental realities of life, which are neither fantastic or neither modern nor unmodern, and as I see them rarely spring dayish or breezy or coslonoid. Since this next play, The Whale of the Saints, was staged at the Abbey Theatre in 1905, again to nationalist disapproval, and then in 1906 at the Distress Theatre in Berlin. The critic Joseph Holloway claimed that the play combined idyllic and dirt. The play, widely regarded as Synge's masterpiece, The Playboy of the Western World, as first performed at the Abbey Theatre on 26 January 1907. A comedy about apparent patricide, it attracted a hostile reaction from sections of the Irish public. The Freeman's Journal described it as an unmitigated, protected libel upon Irish peasant men and ode still upon Irish girlhood. Arthur Griffith, who believed that the Abbey Theatre was insufficiently politically committed, described the play as a vile and inhuman story told in the foulest language we have ever listened to from a public platform, and perceive a slight on the virtue of Irish womanhood in the line, a drift of chosen females standing in their ships. At the time, a ship was known as a symbol representing King Oshia and adultery. A significant portion of the audience at the first performance rioted, causing the third act of the play to be acted out in Damshire. Riots continued at each of the scheduled performances that week. It's referred to this incident in a speech to the Abbey audience in 1926 on the fourth night of The Plough and the Stars, when he declared, "You have disgraced yourself again. Is this to be an ever recurring celebration of the arrival of Irish genius? Since first and then, oh Caesar." Although the writing of the Twinker's wedding began at the same time as Riders to the Sea and In the Shadow of the Glen, it took since 5 years to complete and was finished in 1907. Riders was performed in the Request Court Theatre in Galway 4 to 8 January 1907 and not performed again until 1909, and only then in London. The first critic to respond to the play was Daniel Kurkari, who said, "One is sorry Synge ever wrote so poor a thing, and one fails to understand why it ever should have been said anywhere." Synge died at the Elpis Nursing Home in Dublin on 24 March 1909 at the age of 37 and was buried in Mount Jerome Cemetery, Harold's Cross, Dublin. A collected volume poems and translation with a preface by Yeats was published by the Kuala Press on 8 April 1909. Yeats, an actress and one-time fans Molly Allen, completed Synge's unfinished final play, Deirdre of the Sorrows, and it was presented by the Abbey Played on Thursday, 13 January 1910, with Algood as Deirdre. Thank you, my dear students. Hope that you will uh, try to understand the background of the author Edmund John Millington Synge, and you will practice uh, the play. In my next class, I will discuss about the play Riders to the Sea. Until then, stay at home, stay safe, be careful. Thank you.